And I will be going on the count of three. One, two, three.
Hello, everyone. This is your Institute Weekly Review, and we're bringing you Great American Builder Birthdays, Charles Brush, born today, a look at the China's private hacking industry, and a TikTok ban is looking more and more like impending reality. Let's get right into the news.
So, for Great American birthdays, today we're celebrating Charles Brush. Our first article usually is we're kind of having a commemorative section to discuss Charles and what he did. So, quick overview of Charles. He was born 175 years ago today, March 17th, 2024. And his big inventions that have kind of changed the way we interact with the world are both streetlights as well as turbine generators, making them lighter and more useful for everyday life, generating electricity. So, what about Charles Brush stood out with you, Tyler? I want to start right there.
What I want to talk about with him that I thought was really interesting was he's kind of like the classic American builder story. So he grows up on a farm in the middle of nowhere. His parents are farmers, like that's literally all they are. And the key distinction, I guess, was that he's born in Euclid, Ohio, and he goes through and he kind of has this like mechanical savvy about him. And his parents see that he's kind of like tinkering in their basement. So at like 12 years old, they like give him a dedicated lab space. They kind of nurtured that. And then he was kind of fortunate that his community actually had like a lot of equipment for electricity in the high school. So he got to basically from an early age get exposed to cutting edge technology, which is really cool. And I guess what was interesting about that to me was uh, the idea that he kind of came from a middle nowhere place, but because his educational system and the people around him kind of helped nurture that, he was able to really get ahead. Um,
Yeah,
like
living.
because his education was like well equipped, it doesn't matter where you are, he was able to end up getting the expertise that enabled him to do this.
Yeah, it really is kind of a true American dream story of coming from a podunk town per se. And I mean, by the time he was towards the tail end of his career, he was literally living on the road called Millionaire Row with you know Charles Rockefeller. Um, he really was able to ascend the ranks of both wealth and esteem through his own genius, in the way that we all kind of like to imagine. Um, that, like I said, the quintessential American dream right there.
But I think also like with the American dream, we kind of always like we make it seem like it's this one guy on an island. Um, but something that really struck me about his story was the multiple amount of times that um, it was his ability to engage with people that was kind of what also made him successful. So, for instance, instead of getting like a loan to go to college from like an institution, he got a loan from his uncle. So he's kind of keeping that money in the family, and it's not like something where he's going to get like sharked. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
then there's also another story out there where like I was saying earlier, his parents kind of nurtured that interest, and then his teachers nurtured the same thing. But when he was out there like inventing in his spare time, uh, when he eventually made his lights, he had to kind of like engage with the community and kind of convince them that they weren't evil.
mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people would see the bright lights and they would just stare at them because they, imagine like you've never seen that before, and it would like hurt their eyes. So he had to kind of like engage with the community to kind of like, I guess, use rhetoric to say, hey, look, this is going to be way better in the long term. So I think that's really interesting that like an engineer, a solo inventor, really had to, interact with the community in order to really convince them that what he was doing was good.
Yeah, no such thing as a self-made man. Just all the people along the way that got him there.
Yeah.
It's I do
Another
want
thing
to highlight
yeah,
how
go.
big of a baller this dude is. He's the first guy in Cleveland. He his big thing was lights and generators, um, and he was the first guy in Cleveland to have electric lights in his house. I'm just imagining, the jealous neighbor sitting next to him, as he goes out and lights his mansion's torches, his seeing Charles next door just walk in, push a button in the wall, and then boom, his whole house is like a Christmas parade. It's a fun thought. That being said, enough with Charles Brush and history. We're going to jump over to something a little bit more current. If you'd like to tell us about this one.
Okay. So I saw an article the other day that was kind of a jump into this particular company here, iSoon, and what it's like to be inside China's private hacking industry. So it's kind of a little bit of a background. Most of the Chinese hacking industry used to be kind of state run, but somewhere around I think like the 2010s or something like that, uh, basically the U.S. started cracking down on China and demanding that they stop supporting these type of things. So officially, they stopped their state-led activity, or at least some of it, and instead, these private companies have kind of randomly sprung up in tandem, you know,
Are
out
you
of
implying
nowhere.
some kind of coincidence?
Well, it's definitely like this article says that this organization, iSoon, or maybe it's another one that's kind of like it, is funded by like the Chinese Academy of Sciences or
Hmm.
like through a middleman. So it's quite obvious that what they did is they just said, okay, yeah, yeah, these are private companies. But even then, like let's take a step back and ask yourself a question: would the U.S. support private hacking companies? No, that would be illegal, but China does. So that tells you that it's basically their cop out. But
Yeah.
anyway, so this company here, it's founded in 2010 by a guy who claimed himself to be like a really really big hacking patriot, and he kind of tries to spin it uh, to his underlings that this is them like fighting for their country. But what's really interesting is they found like documents from this group where it's talking about how this guy is kind of the leader is like super Machiavellian, and he has like all these notes on like Chinese officials who want to contract his company to do hits on people or whatever.
Uh huh.
And like in the logs, he's talking about like I guess like the proclivities of the Chinese state actor, like talking about oh he's really like he has a weakness for women, or like he likes this type of food and he's kind of a glutton or something like that, or like if you get him drunk then he'll do this.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting how that panned out. It kind of shows you that one, perhaps it really isn't fully controlled by the state, but there's kind of this weird perverse thing going on here where the state is almost getting used for a private company, but it's being supported the same, or not the state, but the private company is being supported in this weird way. Um, and another thing that I thought was really interesting about this one is wait, you think of China, like Russia, all these places being like super sophisticated hacking groups,
Hmm.
because we always hear about how many hits that they get. But in the article, it says that these guys are basically paid like McDonald's workers, or at least the base level guys.
Really?
Yeah, like it talks about how the contracting like state government guy or whatever the equivalent name is in China. It was like super dissatisfied with the quality of the work that he received, and it's because a lot of the guys were like not trained in this at all. The
Yeah.
CEO just found random guys and said, "Oh, you want to do something that's a little bit better than flipping burgers or the equivalent flipping."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just pulled him off the street and
yeah.
said, type away.
So I wanted to petition that to you and kind of ask like, well, one, it somewhat works. This private hacking industry has scared the West, but really should we? If like these things are, well, I guess does that underscore that we just really didn't care about security, or does that underscore something about how uh, maybe hacking is something that really anyone could get into. I don't know. What do you think?
Right. I think that it kind of is almost like a phantom sword of if these, if what's kind of been said, these groups are a little bit undertrained despite being funded, are they a threat? But I guess at the same time, do they need to be a threat? If if people think they're a threat, if the West, starts diverting resources that could have gone into development into cybersecurity endeavors, even if the threat isn't there on the other side, and we're wasting energy putting up a wall that never really might get breached, or are they, the criminals, or I say criminals from a Western perspective that we fear. It's it's a confusing or a tough veil to pierce. I think we're fighting a one-sided battle against a shadow enemy. Anytime you're talking about cybersecurity.
Yeah, and it's like with cybersecurity, it's like the, the people who get trained in cybersecurity are going to get paid a crap ton because the private industry, like the skills that you learn there, people would want to poach you, at least in our space.
Oh yeah,
So in order to train up something, a person that would be able to defeat these guys, you're training an equivalent domestic guy who could bounce in a couple of years, and you're not going to be able to retain them. So it's like one, when you're paying them, you're gonna have to pay them this inflated amount just to keep them, but you're
yeah,
probably not even going to be able to. So like just with the personnel stuff, forcing us on defense with these paper mache tigers, just random burger flippers from the other
yeah.
side. you know,
Yeah, a hundred head hacker team sounds a lot scarier than 98 people off the street sitting behind a computer and a manager and a boss.
yeah,
Um, that being
and I
said,
don't know.
on a different front of the China United States uh, techno conflict, I'd like to jump over to our final article. We can certainly discuss the hackers more in our backlog should we choose. But what I wanted to cover is this week's development in the escalating tensions over TikTok between the United States and China. It seemed like somewhat out of the blue this past week, the House of Representatives here in the United States passed a bill proposing not the banning of TikTok, but the forced divestment of it from Tencent or ByteDance, a Chinese company with some ties to the Chinese government. And this is definitely causing a very sharp, escalation in the tensions between these two countries. As China is very fond of TikTok, it is kind of a glowing Hollywood sign across the globe for China of an extremely successful piece of tech that the whole globe is using. Typically, in the past in the tech world, it's been Silicon Valley and in the past couple of years, India, that have kind of produced the giant tech corporations, your Facebooks, your Googles, your Snapchats, that have dominated the space. Now China has its own local grown version that they're extremely proud of, and it's the reason the United States is proposing this is just due to the influence the Chinese government would have just on data collection of kind of mass surveillance of the United States citizens, as well as just the ability to manage what gets put in front of them, what content they consume. Kind of an additional note in this whole case is when TikTok found out that the House was voting on this, they put up a little pop-up on TikTok for all the users saying, the House is going to ban us, call your representative, and had a button that calls the representative, and just flooded the call centers that receive these calls with pro TikTok arguments, and that kind of is a perfect example of how the Chinese government can use this tech to influence us just by pushing that notification. The amount of government interaction from a typically not very vocal group of young people is immediately magnified. it definitely plays into the wider China United States conflict that's kind of been brewing across the globe over the last couple of years. I'm interested. I know I've been throwing a lot of information at you. Is what do you think about this?
Okay, so one, the thing that I thought was a lot of people, I heard a lot of people complain about this. The people calling because of TikTok basically encouraging them to talk to their representatives. But I actually think even though it demonstrates that they can manipulate our populace into doing something that benefits them, uh, because these groups don't normally engage, it's young kids. I think this could actually be a net benefit in the future because it encouraged people to say, hey, wait a minute, I have an opinion. I'm going to go and interact with my government, which is the whole point of democracy, and, exercise my opinion, which is something that has not really typically, I never on this scale probably ever happened. So I think this will be big for that generation.
Yeah, I I think it definitely highlights, uh, the question of did TikTok have this influence over people, or was it simply they provided a very easy route to voice that opinion, where if I have a complaint with my local city government, I'm not exactly immediately sure how to take action on that. I need to do a little bit of research. And that might be a barrier in me actually vocalizing that. Just by putting that button that says, hey, here's something that's happening. What's your opinion? And putting the button in front of them that says, act. If there were more tools that did something like that in broad, uh, the hands of the people using them, would we see a more active voting demographic as a whole? Just by putting the tools,
I think
making
we
it
would.
easy.
I think we would. It seems like what I'm getting at, or not what I'm getting at, but what you're kind of getting at is a lot of people don't, from their school or anything, really understand the government with it.
Yeah,
And this provided tools such that people could do that. I think that's a problem, and for a couple reasons, right? Like, uh, if we always complain that uh, our people that are running the show are too old, well, part of that is because the young people have no idea how to do it.
right.
So if we can come up with like little pipelines and tools that get them more engaged, then over time we're going to see, more people listening to them because they are engaged, more of their opinions enacted, more of them voting, and then more power to that individual group, probably leading to younger, more vital leaders, you know.
Yeah. No, certainly, definitely something that I think deserves some thought, and maybe we'll discuss it more. I do want to open the floor up. We do have a member of the audience here. If there's anything, any questions presented, or anything we want to go back on, and that includes you, Tyler, I'd like to open the floor for some discussion.
Yeah, one, just to clarify with the second story, by hits, do you mean like data collection? Because obviously my brain immediately goes to like murder.
Yeah, Tyler, do you
You
want to
said,
jump in?
yeah, she said hits.
Yeah. Is
Yeah,
that like data?
it's like data collection or breaking into things, not like so they're a hacking group.
Yeah. Okay.
So kind of think about it like in terms of kind of they're trying to like acquire like information usually. So like
Mm-hmm.
IP is what they're normally used for, but other groups, not just iSoon, have been used for things probably like what happened in Iran. You know how we did that thing where we kind of like tweaked some numbers and some algorithms such that it destroyed their like um,
Centrifuges.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like that's the other type of stuff that they do.
Because my brain immediately went to like they're asking this hacking group to like put out hits or something. Like,
Well, I mean,
uh,
they're hits, they're digital hits, because in a
yeah,
sense, it's like destroying a system or opening it up such that a digital safe is now open and then people can go and steal it.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
um, most of what the private industry is kind of like reacting to, or what the demand is from the government, is basically stuff that allows them to conduct espionage, so like acquisition of data. Um, because like around 2015, that's when like the U.S. kind of cracked down on them.
yeah. That kind of leads into my next question, which is more of kind of like discussion point, but like, and because of so, it's relevant to the last two stories about, these examples are kind of more direct examples of data collection. But I feel like there's a lot more covert uh info collection. I'm just curious, what your thoughts on that, particularly that of Temu and Wish, because, they got to make their money somewhere if they're selling this stuff for so cheap.
I mean, like even TikTok, you could say is so. I guess you kind of made it seem like it's overt, um, but there's so many different ways that the data you're giving is kind of covert as well. I guess if you're saying Timu and those guys are covert, getting data, I guess TikTok would be the same, whereas these guys are something different.
Yeah, I just feel like everybody's talking about TikTok, but nobody's talking about like Temu.
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of what the TikTok idea is getting at. It's saying like, okay, we really need to think about this as a whole, and they're kind of probably using TikTok as the example.
Okay.
At least I don't know. What do you think about that, Mason?
Yeah,
Do you think that's what this is?
I I think it's definitely another example of China trying to kind of out America at the tech, that we kind of think we pioneered. I definitely am not as knowledgeable on Temu or companies like Shein who kind of are breaking into spaces that have kind of long been dominated by, say your Amazon or your WalMarts, and selling products that are somehow still desirable for prices that are just astronomically low. But I think that it is an example of China, even if it's not an intentional expansion of their influence, expanding their influence over to the broader portions of the globe that we kind of, I don't want to say thought were immune, but the Chinese version of Facebook nobody uses in America because we view the American Facebook as you know the Facebook to use, but now they
I guess
have.
that's kind of an interesting point there too, because like, so she's kind of bringing up this notion that these companies maybe are doing something okay, but they're definitely taking way too much data and they can do stuff that they shouldn't be. But at the same time, we've seen that same argument being applied to Facebook and our own companies as well. So maybe this is us trying to shift blame about how, new technology has changed how the government should think about privacy because people just did cool shit and then it impacts our rights. I don't know.
Yeah. I guess I mean it could be the case of, uh, for all we know, and this I'm putting on my tinfoil hat for a second. What we could be seeing right here is the effects of Google, Facebook lobbying our government to create a new straw man for us to get whipped up into a frenzy about. So we're not looking at them and we're saying, hey, wait a second, TikTok is kind of harvesting a lot of our data. What the heck is going on there? And we're getting tunnel visioned on, hey, we got to do something about TikTok, and not thinking about, hey, wait a second, didn't we experience a huge problem in 2016 with the data Facebook was collecting being used to impact an election? And I'm removing my tinfoil hat now after saying I think that this is an inside media job to whip us up.
Yeah. Uh, 'Cause I obviously haven't done a lot of research on like Temu and Wish, but I just thought it was very strange that all of a sudden you get ads for this everywhere. People have mentioned how they afforded Super Bowl ads somehow, and it's like they can't be
They
making a
afforded
lot.
like four of them. I saw like
Yeah. So like not all that. could feasibly come from sales. But I think kind of going on to another point now, kind of going back to the Tyler thinking more engagement from youth. And I think that kind of brings up a point of like, maybe not necessarily in this instance, it's going to lead to more youth engagement, but it kind of brings up a question of like, well, if the youth aren't going to the polls or aren't interested, maybe we need to, for people that want to appeal to the youth, go to their platforms.
Yeah, meet them
Um,
where they are instead of asking them to come to you.
yeah.
No, I think that any aspiring political campaign managers take note.
Yeah.
With that being said,
Uh,
I will open us up for one final comment on things, and then we will close it off for this week.
I guess. All right. One thing that I was really thinking about just here is like, yes. So with iSoon, part of what allows them to get so many like heads in their thing is the fact that they're able to um, basically use this. They kind of tie everything to this patriotic way that like these guys are kind of fighting against China's enemies. So they're kind of like using their tech and then combining like rhetoric for patriotism to kind of get a lot of heads in the door.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's interesting that they did that, but also we see with you know Charles Brush, he had to use rhetoric in order to kind of get his ideas out from being scary. And then we also see another way that tech enables people to use or, shape the opinion of their people that are elected with TikTok. So I think it's really interesting how maybe the artifacts that you create can shape rhetoric and how that's something not a lot of engineers think about. And maybe that's something we should think about.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely an extremely uh, good through line to tie through what we discussed today. Hopefully, we can continue that through line next week when we discuss for our weekly tech news. Join us again then.